not entirely sure why I'm making this video or if it's going to go over well. If you have been watching some of my videos, you probably know that my YouTube channel is very much in a state of infancy. Other than a few videos from like 10 years ago, my content is kind of all over the place. I talk about my depression, I talk about Yu-Gi-Oh! I want to talk about so many more things. And one of those things is actually politics, which is going to be fun. I'm not necessarily a very, I'd say, aggravating person. I don't think that that's the right word. What I mean is that I don't necessarily seek out conflict, and I know that stating a political opinion online does tend to draw out conflict sometimes, and I fear that that's simply a risk that I'm going to have to take. My political views are whatever they are, and I just want to start this video really by saying I'm okay with most other views. There are obviously some extreme circumstances in which it's hard to condone it. I know that a popular topic is obviously Nazism, and that's, I guess you could say it's a political opinion, but it's definitely one that I fear is dangerous. Now, there's a lot of things going on in politics, especially in America, and for the record, I'm not American, but I do believe that these things impact the world on a much greater scale than just America, and I've sort of been through a phase where I got really invested into politics, and even so invested into American politics, which is kind of weird when you're not actually American. And I do have a lot of opinions on it. Surprisingly, if you've seen any of my other videos, you might know that I'm an art student, so this shouldn't come as any shock, but I'm left-leaning by most accounts. But some things have happened, and I think now is a good time to start making this sort of video. One of the things that obviously happened recently is that the Capitol in Washington was stormed by a group of Trump supporters. I think as of right now, 4 people were shot. I'm not entirely sure if they were killed. And obviously there's a pretty big fallout coming from this. One of those was Mark Zuckerberg surprisingly stating that Donald Trump would no longer be allowed to post on his Facebook or Instagram, which is obviously not his favorite social media, despite what he might say about Twitter. That seemed to be where he stated most of his opinions. And if you don't know, and you've just been listening to this video now, you probably noticed that I used a past sentence there because, or the past tense, sorry, I'm a bit nervous. But he has been permanently suspended of Twitter. And Twitter made an announcement about this. I don't have it in front of me, and I'm not going to say an exact quote from it, but they said something along the lines of, we've looked at a lot of the things that he said over the recent few events, and they pretty much just came to the conclusion that it did break their terms of service, which is why they banned him. And there is obviously some outrage over this. There's obviously also a lot of people supporting this. People have been calling for Twitter to ban Trump for, I'm pretty sure, just about as long as he's been into politics, I guess, so like late 2015 probably. Trump ban is even trending. I also see that impeachment is trending, which is not something that I think is going to happen simply for the fact that he's only president for 2 more weeks, and you can't really impeach someone that fast, at least not with the things that he's done, which are arguable if they even lead to impeachment, I suppose. Law is not, I do know some things about law, but obviously, again, I'm not American, so I don't know the finer details of most of what goes on. And by that I mean things like the finer details of the law. But one thing that I did see popping up was people saying that this is censorship, and even some people saying it's interesting to see how the left always seems to be against censorship, and then when somebody right-wingers get banned or they get their account suspended, they applaud censorship. And I think a similar thing happened when it was Alex Jones who was banned from a variety of media. And I am personally someone who is always against censorship. I fear that no good will come of it. Despite that, there are things that obviously are censored in places, and whether or not that's good is kind of up for debate. There's certainly instances where I think it might sometimes be a good thing, but at its core, censorship is something that I deeply fear, actually, which it's quite weird to say that, because I've never really been confronted with censorship other than someone saying my opinion is stupid and I should shut the fuck up or something like that, which isn't censorship on the level that I'm trying to talk about here. But I don't necessarily think that this is censorship. Obviously, when you sign up to Twitter or Facebook or Instagram, you agree to a number of terms. And when you're a political candidate, that does seem to be different, because spreading lies about the election, specifically the American election, seems to be something that you can be punished for, which in all honesty is kind of weird. If I say something that is wrong about the election in my country, Twitter's not coming for me. Hell, even if I say that the election in America was rigged or something like that, Twitter's probably not going to ban me, because I have, 3 followers? They don't care what I have to say, which and that sort of shows their priority. And in that sense, again, I'm not necessarily agreeing with this. It does make sense that they go after people who have an audience, like Donald Trump, for example. But Trump simply broke the terms of service, so they kicked him off the platform, and that's not censorship, in my opinion. That's just the service providing, actually following through on their own rules, which is a lot of the arguments that we also saw when Alex Jones was banned from various media. And Twitter, I believe, even then said, we're not banning Alex Jones right now. If he continues to break terms of service or does so in the future, we will ban him. And that seems to be what happened with Trump here. Obviously, Trump put out some statements on his Twitter during all of these riots. But really, the bigger issue about this to me is actually something that does have to do with censorship. It's how integral social media has become in a thing like this. Like, people were looking towards Donald Trump's Twitter for statements that he was going to put out when all of this was happening. And obviously people were also looking to traditional media, but Twitter was definitely the fastest way that we were going to see him say anything about this. And that's sort of a weird thing, because in a way, I fully support that these brands and companies are able to enforce their own rules in this way. But at the same time, Twitter at this point has become so much bigger than itself in a way, which it sounds like such a weird thing to say, to me at least, but Twitter has become almost integral to politics and to many other things even, and that's sort of where the problem for me occurs. This is something that I've been thinking about for a long time. And in a way, I'm going to relate this to 1984, which is a book by George Orwell, which most people pretend that they have read, or at least have been forced to read it by schools or whatever. In most of those stories of dystopian futures, we see that the government is being tyrannical and cracking down on things. And one of the things that they always crack down on is the media, because the media is extremely important. And that's how people get their information. But as we see it now, at least what I think does need to be addressed is it isn't the government that's making these rules. It isn't going the way we we're essentially warned about, it's companies themselves. Things like Twitter, YouTube, Instagram, Facebook, any form of social media, really. And to some extent, even more than that, places like Disney, which are probably the biggest company right now, buying up everything. These are the places that are in control of our media. There's obviously alternative media, but that's few and far between, especially if you're looking for factual evidence, really. And that's really something it isn't something that I'm struggling with necessarily, but it is something that I find vastly interesting. And it's also something that I'm a little bit afraid of, because at what point does this media become so big that it does start to control everything? And I know that I sound like a crazy person when I say that Disney is going to do this, and I don't necessarily think that they're going to do so. But it does seem very scary to me that all of the media that we consume, especially on large scales, comes from one place. Because if you look at some of the places that sort of support differing of opinions, they always encourage you to go to more than one news source. There's an account on Twitter which is called All Sides, which tweets out news articles, especially about politics, and they mention like from which side of the political spectrum it comes, which is, I think, a good thing. And it's one of the news sources that I use is Philip DeFranco, which is also someone that does sort of look to the broader spectrum of news and to provide all of that, things that you might not necessarily hear in traditional media or something like that. Which I think that's a good thing, because these people also encourage you to not just look at their own news source, but also to look at other news sources. Because one thing that we've seen, and this is not just in politics, this is something we see even with brands, there's this trend going on that every brand or every thing that exists needs to have its own personality. Wendy's is a very good example of that on Twitter. They started to behave in a certain way, which is sort of now the Wendy's brand. And that, besides the fact that they sell burgers, obviously, or whatever it is they do, we don't have Wendy's here. I have no clue what they actually do. But that's sort of part of the issue, really, because everything has become so personalized that it sort of taints what they put out. And with something like Wendy's, a company having a persona or whatever, I don't see that going badly. But when you look at something like the news in general and things like censorship, when all of that is influenced by personal opinions, it becomes tainted, because there are certainly things that, even if I say I'm vastly against censorship, there's things that I don't want out on the internet or out in the world, things about me, things that I might have done, and it's not even that I necessarily feel that I need to hide those things, but privacy is important, which is something that I do intend to address in the future as well. Just a really quick edit here at the end of the video. I originally concluded my video, or at least the text part of it, slightly differently. I feel that my point didn't really come across in that. So to sort of wrap up, I do fully support Twitter banning Trump. I do believe that that is the right decision to make, but I also believe that there's a conversation to be had, and certainly needs to be had actually in the future, about the role that these companies play in our lives as they are and as they continue to grow. So in conclusion, I don't necessarily think that this is censorship, but I do believe that there's a conversation to be had about censorship. Again, I do fully support Twitter and even the other platforms that are taking action here, banning Trump, and I feel that that needed to be said outright instead of sort of tiptoeing around it.